Well, welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people and so many old friends through the decades, especially this guy who I have known almost 40 years now. He introduced himself to me at a LULAC convention in El Paso a gazillion years ago. And we have worked together at two different publications, and it's always been such a learning experience for me to work with this character. The last time we got together was at a bar and restaurant, as fabulous as Wild Detectives, and that place is called Almas Rotas, Broken Souls. And it seems like it was quite a metaphor to be at a place called Broken Souls. And it seems though in the 2 months since then that it's been a very soul-crushing time for journalism and journalists. And I'm wondering, Freddie, what do you think is the future of storytelling in general, and then storytelling specifically for you?
What a way to get to the, what a way to bring the crowd down. I want to start by thanking everyone. I feel like we've all come of age together. With the Dallas Morning News for 30 years. But before the Dallas Morning News, I was at the Wall Street Journal. I moved from Philadelphia in I think it was 1988. And at the time, I wasn't happy in Philadelphia. I just wanted to get back to Texas and be close to the Southwest, be close to the border. And remember driving in on I think it was I-30 downtown and looking at all the buildings and thinking, wow. I put the Gilbert Bailon said, when you get to Texas, make sure you put the Norteño station, to make you feel like you're home. And there for the Wall Street Journal for a couple of years, there was a guy who recruited me, George Getchow. George. Quick story about George. I was in Philadelphia at the Journal, and my editor was Frank Allen. George had been trying to poach me from the bureau, and he finally got his way. And I called him up. We were going to meet at the DFW airport, and I said that there's no cell phone at this time. I said, George, how would I recognize you? How do I know who you are, et cetera? And he says, don't worry, you will hear me. So I'm sitting down waiting for my connection flight, and in walks this guy with big cowboy boots and just yelling, Alfredo Corchado, Alfredo Corchado. And it was George Getchow. I knew I wanted to work for George. So I come to Dallas, but I feel like the last 35, 36 years has been like a relationship between Dallas and myself. I mean, I'm from Durango. I grew up in the San Joaquin Valley, grew up in El Paso. But in some ways, Dallas has always been part of my life. And having come from outside, coming in, I used to live right near University of Pennsylvania in Philly. And I thought, I want to live near a university in Dallas. And I tried moving in near SMU. And I remember they were showing me apartments, and this guy said, I think you'll be okay. They might think you're the gardener, but I think you'll be okay. I ended up living somewhere on Lemon Avenue. But I feel like in that time, we grew up together. We saw things change. We saw life change. I was able to bring, through my job at the Morning News, working in Mexico, working on the border, I was able to bring Mexico to North Texas. I was able to bring the border to North Texas. One of the stories I'm most proud of, it was Alfredo Carvajal idea, was to bring the border, show how the border has moved from this physical space, 2,000 mile space, to places like Dallas, to places like New York City. I mean, how these issues are moving. And as I walked in today, I felt kind of sad because I thought, wow, this relationship is coming to an end. But there's so much love in this room, and it's been such a privilege, such an honor to have been able to tell your stories, that I don't think you're gonna get rid of me. I think I'm gonna be here for a long time telling stories. So let me just turn this on Dianne. Dianne, how do you fix this? I mean, how do you assess what's happening with Latino journalists?
Mr.
She
Corchado,
is actually the one that's been at
Mr.
this
Corchado,
longer.
you deflected. You didn't answer my 2 questions.
It's a very depressing question. I was hired. I remember I was hired, and I couldn't figure out why someone would come all the way from Philly to El Paso to recruit me. This person had recruited me in I'm dating myself, May of '86, and the UTEP, the University of Texas at El Paso, where I was a student, they were, wow, you're being recruited by the Wall Street Journal in Philadelphia. I didn't want to leave El Paso. I thought El Paso, Juarez felt like a revolution. There was a movement of the PAN, etc. But I ended up going to Philly. I think it took me 6 months to say yes. I went to Philly, and right away I thought, I feel like an oddball here. I miss the culture, I missed the food, I missed everything about the border. And so I tried to pretend to kind of fit in and become one of them. All my colleagues were either from Ivy League schools, Yale, Harvard, Columbia, I think there was one from Chicago, one from ASU, but I wanted to be them. I wanted to feel like I was part of that group. And my editor was onto me, and he said, I spent all this time trying to recruit you, and you need to decide, are you going to be them or are you going to be you? And I said, what does that mean? He said, this country is changing. This country is looking like you, and we need people like you to be in these newsrooms. And right after that, I stopped going to Wanamaker's and buying suits. I became myself again. I was really lucky to come to the Morning News and be in Mexico, and my editors were people like David Cedeno, Ricardo Chavira, Gilbert Bailon. And so now as I'm leaving, I look around the newsrooms, and I saw what happened at the LA Times, I saw what's happening in other papers. I mean, there's been hundreds, if not thousands of people laid off. And unfortunately, the vast majority of them are Hispanic, so I feel like we're going back in time instead of going forward. So how do you rescue those stories, Dianne?
With fierce focus on staying in the business, if you can, and if you don't, if you're not desperate for a paycheck and to feed your family. I understand in El Paso, Freddie, that there's a collaborative of media outlets that have started something called Puente, and that there's an effort to expand it along the 2,000-mile border to bolster journalism and storytelling about the border and deepen our understanding of the border at this really critical time when the border is on the news so much and big in the presidential campaign, and that you may be part of that.
Yeah, very good sources. As of today, I am the executive editor and correspondent of the initiative called Puente News Collaborative. And what's behind it is the El Paso Community Foundation with other foundations along the U.S.-Mexico border, and the help of Microsoft, and we're hoping other funders, to try to rescue the border story. I mean, the border is already a big issue, as you know, in the elections. And the idea is to try to tell these stories not from the point of view of a wall, but the point of view of the bridges. Try to go over that wall and look at the bridges and find out how the border connects to a place like Columbus, Ohio, Dearborn, Michigan, and so on. How the border connects to El Bajío, Querétaro, Guanajuato in Mexico, Zacatecas, Durango, Oaxaca, San Luis Potosí. I mean, the idea is to connect the two through Puente. So it's my first day, and guess what? I'm at Wild Detectives. I will start on Monday, and the first thing we're trying to do is build a team of reporters, correspondents on both sides of the border, and again, to try to tell that story, and through other nonprofit organizations like El Paso Matters, try to get that story to a place like, say, the Texas Standard or other organizations throughout Texas, throughout the United States, and again, try to rescue that story. Try to tell the story away from buoys, away from the DPS, away from fear and the chaos that we see. So it's a tall order, but when I left the Morning News, I thought, maybe I will finish that third book, and I will. This is being taped, so I want to make sure that my agent gets it. I will finish that book, but I think this is quite an opportunity that I can't pass up. It's a great opportunity to do that.
Okay, Freddie, in all your years in newspapering and storytelling, what are you most proud of?
I'm proud of a lot of things. I'm proud of a lot of stories we broke, we told. But in this last few weeks, I've also had time to kind of think. And one of the things that I think about is, what am I not proud of? What were some of the mistakes I made? What were the things that I could go back and maybe change or fix? And I think in the 90s, being in Mexico, I felt that the border was a forgotten place, a forgotten region. And I always felt like if people outside of the border, if they understood how we as border residents live, how the lengths we go through to coexist with one another, the Mexican side, the U.S. side, what we do to understand each other and be tolerant of one another, I think the country would be a better place. Both countries would be better places. So and this is not just me. I mean, I was having a conversation with another very well-known author in El Paso, a guy named David Romo. And David and I have been friends for years. And we were talking about that and lamenting the fact that by bringing so much attention to the border, we fail. That we gave people the idea that this is a place to come and hit it like a piñata and score political points. And I mean, that really hit me on August 3rd, 2019, when a gunman from North Texas, from just up the road here in Dallas, went to El Paso to look for Mexicans and kill Mexicans to stop the Hispanic invasion of Texas. This guy obviously doesn't know history. Doesn't know that Texas was once part of Mexico. But those things have haunted me. August 3rd was also my father's birthday. And I remember we were getting ready to sing happy birthday when the phone started ringing, and we knew it was bad. And since then, I mean, I keep thinking we should have kept the border, we should have kept El Paso as our little secret. We should have not really flaunt who we are and what we are and let others take advantage of that. And so that haunts me a lot. That troubles me a lot. And I think that's also one reason why I thought by doing Puente, I could try to maybe make things better. Maybe really not just focus on the border, but focus on what the border means for other communities miles away from the border. How the border has changed their lives in the United States and in Mexico.
That's very sobering.
Yeah.
One of the things
I'm also drinking tequila, by the way.
One of the wonderful things that I learned about you, learned from you, learned working with you, was the idea that both sides of the story was really both sides of the river.
Right.
And that you are always getting the Mexican side. You would always go across to Juarez and talk to regular folks or politicians, or you make that phone call to Mexico City. And I have to give you a big applause for doing that and making others see the importance of that, and then seeing the Washington Post or the New York Times try and cozy up to your sources and get them in their stories too. And I think that was really important. And along that line, I've been asked to ask you to reflect on how Latinos in the news media have changed the story of America, have shaped the stories of America.
Again, it was the Dallas Morning News in the late 1990s. We did it was a series. It was a whole staff worked on it for months, called The Mexicanization of the United States. And it was going to places like Iowa, North Carolina, Georgia, and I mean, again, at the time, no one knew they were there. But we started reporting. Eric Slago was one of the photographers, just going to places, Vermont, Maine, and just watching how these little restaurants, I mean, it usually starts with the restaurant, and how that was changing the United States, how the demographics were changing across the country. And it's a story that really continues to this day. I mean, we did a lot of firsts at the Morning News. I'm not tooting my horn, but I think, I mean, you got to understand, back then, this is nostalgic journalism, right? People don't like nostalgia that much, but we had 12 people, if you can imagine, 12 people in Mexico, 15 people if you include Monterrey, and El Paso. So we had this whole network, and we were all over the place. I mean, at one time, I think we were breaking more stories than the big than the big papers like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, because there was a huge commitment from the Bilo family in Dallas that we were going to own the Mexico story. We were going to own Cuba. We were one of three bureaus in Cuba. It was the Dallas Morning News, Chicago Tribune, AP, and CNN. I mean, that was the kind of vision that was there. Over the years, it just started trickling down. I mean, it went from 12. Angela Cocherga, who is now my wife, was the bureau chief for the Bilo stations out of Houston, out of Dallas. But it just kind of dwindled down to one person, and that was me. I was covering these two countries, and after the earthquake, after COVID, we moved the bureau to El Paso, but I was still going back and forth. That is my concern now as I leave the Morning News is I know we have to downsize. I know that I understand the economics, but I think if you ignore that story, ignore Mexico, ignore the border, it's coming here. I mean, North Texas is one of the top, if not the top, place for Mexican investment. I mean, it's changing. It's changing the demographics. It's changing the way we live. And I think as the Morning News, I mean, we have some very, very talented reporters. You mentioned Maria, Arcelia, Valeria, and others who are here who are ready to just step in and do these stories. And I hope to have your support. What do? You write letters to the editor and you say, we need these stories because they matter to us.
Okay. One of your last stories was on the braceros and a walk you took through the skeleton of an old government building where braceros had passed through and been housed and checked in, processed. And I know your parents, and your mother is a wonderful, wonderful storyteller. Your father is just a listener. but you were able to extract